It's great to welcome today Kateryna Yeremieieva to our colloquium series on authoritarian laughter. So before we start and before I introduce our speaker today, I would like just to share one image. I wanted to show, I'll try to send it as an attachment, a cartoon celebrating International Women's Day in Crocodile and the Broom, and both are very similar, showing how men are celebrating and enjoying International Women's Day at the table while women are serving them. So two very similar cartoons were published in the Broom and Crocodile. And I believe Perets, the Ukrainian satire and humor journal, also had similar cartoons on this special day. Okay, so let me welcome Dr. Kateryna Yeremieieva, who is joining us from Ukraine. She was born and I think grew up right in Kharkiv, Ukraine. And in 2013, she was awarded master's degree in history, cum laude, from, she received it from Karazin National University in Ukraine. She received her PhD in history from the same university in 2016. Currently, she's a senior lecturer at the Faculty of History and Philology, Ukrainian State University of Railway Transport. She is the author of over 40 scholarly publications and a monograph on Soviet Ukrainian humor and satire journal Perets, which is Pepper in English. Her research interests include history of everyday life in the USSR, humor and history of print media, also application of IT and mathematics in historical research. Her talk today is not just for fun, the Soviet satirical magazines as a weapon, mediator, and entertainment. So thank you, Kateryna, so much for joining us today, and we are looking forward to your lecture.
Yes, thank you. And I try to share my screen and my presentation. Yes. Oh, it seems all right. And hello, my dear colleagues. It is an honor for me to present some results of my research. And thanks for this possibility, Ms. Neringa Klimbyut. I hope my pronunciation is correct. Because very often in my life, I have heard that the theme connected with the humor studies wasn't serious enough. On the contrary, another smaller part of people every time is preparing to have fun during my report, expecting me to tell jokes every time. And sometimes I hear from them, how you manage to do such boring scenes with such funny topic. So I think it is more than interesting to do an autopsy of such miracle scenes as humor, especially their Soviet humor and satire. So I want to introduce my theme of this lecture, not just for fun, the Soviet satirical magazines as a weapon, mediator, and entertainment. And I want to begin with one very interesting case. You can see footage from the comedy film Garage by Rozanov, 1979, and there is an episode where two characters representing a golden years were talking about their professions. I researched satire, says the girl. Her interlocutor found out that it was a Soviet satire, and after this, he replied that it was an incredible profession because she researched what doesn't exist. It is significant that the researcher of satire did not deny the strange fact, but simply smiled and note that her interlocutor is pretty interesting. Thus, Razanov, a director known for his tendency to discover the real Soviet man with the intimacy of his everyday life, and in this case constructed a cinematic dialogue which provoked a huge number of questions, especially in modern person. Why didn't satire exist? And in this case, how was it possible to research satire? Or maybe the character of the film was researching something called satire, but in essence it was not. Was there perhaps a Soviet satire that was very different from the common understanding of this term? What in this case did the satirists, directors of comedies do then? And how in the end could one investigate something that didn't exist and at the same time understood the absence of the subject of his or her research in reality? Oh, complete. It's quite interesting. And was it possible for an official life culture to exist in authoritarian, totalitarian society? Despite the calls from the Soviet authorities to use satire and humor to educate society, and despite the humorists' desire to implement these calls, some researchers doubt whether Soviet culture figures really quote everything by their names when talking about satire and humor. For example, the researcher Bakhtila raised the question whether the Soviet satire was a reality or a phantom. Reviewing the conference on humor in the USSR, he concluded that it is still a reality, but satire in the Soviet society was a specific phenomenon, and its place in culture was far from unambiguous. In order to understand what particular was quoted in the Soviet discourse as the Soviet satire, in this lecture, I will try to solve several research problems. What functions were assigned to what we call Soviet satire, and how the understanding of these functions was transformed in different subjects? In particular, how did the authorities see the place of satire in the Soviet media space? What were the self-presentations of Soviet satirists, and how did the recipients perceive satirical publications? And now I want to say something about methodology. And despite the fact that we primarily focus on the analysis of historical sources for the formation of the theory from below, we need to define our biases, that is, theories from above, which will become our main methodological tools. And I want to introduce several of them. I will try to implement all of these theories or approaches. But at the end of my lecture, I suggest we think about the correctness of implementation and combining of these tools. So, what was the role of the Soviet satire and the official humor at all? In order to answer this question, we can use conclusions of Perets that political humor in any case is aimed at authorities. Political jokes and cartoons very often lead to the desacralization of the political leaders, but at the same time, humor also helped prolong their rule. This was due to the reduction of conflicts and the dispersal of resistance towards the authorities. Maybe this ambiguity of the political humor also responded to the psychological functions of humor as the removal of tension or stress. according to FREUD, Martin, DIXON, and KALLEN. According to KALLEN, I laugh at what which has engendered or degraded or has fought to suppress, enslave, or destroy what I cherish and has failed. My laughter signalized its failure and my own liberation. So, did the Soviet government sacrifice its sacredness when it allowed the existence of the Soviet humor, or even used it so that the subjects could let off steam and distract themselves from a possible conflict with the government? To determine the role of satire in the Soviet society, we should be looking at the other psychological functions of humor. Humor can be a mechanism to explore the social environment and clarify the political views of others. Yes, if we are not sure of the interlocutor's reaction to our ideological preferences, we can reveal his opinion by a more frivolous means, by telling an appropriate political joke. If the reaction of the interlocutor is negative, the damage in the relationship will not be as significant as in the direct expression of political views, because it is just a joke. So humor can be a mechanism for exemption from liability due to the semantic load of political joke. In the reaction to a political joke is positive, it can be the first step from a social game to the maybe creation of a social group, including according to political preferences. In this case, humor will play the role of a factor that, according to Fine, as example, maintains the cohesion of this group, its identity, creates specific culture practices that become everyday rituals. These practices will include the dissemination of jokes understood only by members of this group, a kind of context for the retransmission of humor, and so on, maybe. For such groups, objects of discussion, ridicule become common, and certain political topics begin to be conceptualized through humor. Humor can also serve to express aggression, to feel superiority over whom or what you ridicule, according to the psychoanalytic theory of FREUD and the theory of superiority and humiliation of Hobbes and Gruner. According to the theory of establishment status, the superior ridicules the subordinate to indicate his superiority. Thus, those who disagree with their political status quo can, within the social game mediated by the broadcast of jokes, put themselves above a person with a higher social status, with greater power, and so on. But on the other hand, political humor, according to Long and Grasser, can act as a mechanism for establishing social norms and control, which occur by ridiculing an external group of members of its own, which in terms of dominant ideology or group identity are noted deviant behavior. So conflict strongly connected with the struggle and resistance. But struggle and resistance through humor would be quite specific. So we should consider one another theory to assess the impact of political humor on the socio-cultural environment of the Soviet Union. In the theory of everyday resistance by James Scott. So real resistance has maybe 4 criteria. It should be organized, collective, open, principled, selfless, and real resistance should have revolutionary circumstances. But everyday resistance is, in contrary, disorganized, private, hiding, opportunistic, selfish, and it consists of rumors and jokes about authority, small-scale sabotage, and so on. And the most maybe vivid example of such everyday resistance is SVEJK, character created by Yaroslav Gashik, and I want to introduce such SVEJK style. And according to Radka Pitlik, SVEJK isn't an ordinary creature, facing face to face with the great power of world. He, with a joking blink, speaks the truth, and this is also its aesthetic value. It is always beautiful when the weakest become the strongest. And maybe among the methodologically fundamental work for understanding the place of humor in formal and informal culture are the works of BAKHTIN, MIKHAIL BAKHTIN. He studied laughter as an integral component of folk carnival culture. And he said about seriousness of official culture and so on. Their later series became a kind of catalyst for solving the problem of place of humor in this seriousness official culture of the Soviet society. And maybe to analyze the emotional content of humorous works of their magazine paper and the other satirical magazines was used a theory of emotional regime by Reddy. The expression of the official side of public life was a demonstration of loyalty to the government by expressing their trust in it, participation in public rituals, learning the official vocabulary, identifying the right emotions at the right time. Reddy believed that such a regime had helped to establish an agreement between citizens and the authorities in order to achieve the stability of the existing system. And also we should to address maybe Antonio Gramsci concept of establishment of hegemony through the institution autonomous authority at first glance. So could these Soviet satirical magazines be such a tool with the potential to be a mechanism of undetectable ideologization of recipients? So I hope today we try to bring order in this arsenal or maybe add something useful for it. And now maybe let's investigate all of the ambiguity of the Soviet satire phenomenon. To be dealing with the production of official humor in the Soviet Union meant to test the strengths of your own sense of humor, common sense, ability to understand the party line in the informational policy. As Makevchuk, the chief editor of the Ukrainian satirical magazine paper, said, it is difficult to make a satirical magazine. It is very difficult. It is the same as dancing in a sieve and not to fall in a hole. And in the worst case, it's fun dancing on the throat. In this photo, you can see the editorial board of this magazine. And maybe it's quite important to study such magazine as Perets paper, because in 1959, Perets took second place in the world in circulation among the satirical magazines after Crocodile, and fifth place among the most common central magazines of the USSR. In 1979, the circulation of Perets' paper reached 3,300,000 copies, which was an incredible number for a magazine of satire and humor in the national level. Even after the reduction of the magazine circulation in 1982, it remained the leader among all Ukrainian magazines. But paper had quite interesting history because circumstances after the revolution, the public place of satire and humor was more than debatable. Civil war was accompanied by information confrontation, the construction of the image of the enemy, including with the help of political humor. But after the eventual establishment of the Soviet power in most of Ukrainian land, all tools to combat enemies, including humor, were auditable. Since the 1920s, Soviet culture figures debated the possibility of using humor in public discourse and everyday life of the aesthetic revolutionaries. Culture figures were surprised by the Soviet people who can't help laughing in this hard time. Trauberg and the People's Commissar for Education, Lunacharsky, as an example, had to declare that the Soviet people had not forgotten how to laugh. And Lunacharsky expressed the opinion that Soviet humor has the right to exist, because even the Tsars had jesters who told them the truth. From now on, the People Commissar continued, there will be jesters of the proletariat, wise advisors about how to found a new society. So official warfare was given the green light to exist. However, it should be clarified the purpose of humor, its limits and forms of presentation. In the 1930s, the role of weapons of various calibers was increasingly assigned to humor. Culture figures are increasingly concentrating humor entertainment. As example, Julie Fellowes, Веселые ребята by Alexandrov, and Humor Weapon, noting that humor is no longer a joke, that their masses desperately need humor, but without a smile. Humor was to be a weapon that was both a demonstration of strength and means for the final destruction of enemy, certainly after the real weapon is used, and shortcomings of the new society, but not the Soviet regime itself. The further fate of Soviet official humor came down to the fact that its creators tried to find a balance between teaching and entertainment, certainly without prioritizing fun and trying to hit the right targets, which was safe for humorists themselves. It was against that background that the paper was published at first in 1941, and it have a predecessor, satirical and humorous magazine Червоный Perets Red Paper, the first copy of which was published in late 1922 in Kharkiv. Their magazine was closed in 1929 due to libel directed against the creative work carried out by the party and the working class, building a socialist Ukraine. In other words, it was quite dangerous to critique everyday life in the year of the great turning point. And Червоный Perets was not mentioned in 1941. In peacetime, the magazine did not last long. Already in June 1941, the staff of Perets had to switch to wartime. And in 1942, the editorial board of Perets paper resumed its activities in Moscow for using paper humor as a mobilization mechanism. Issues of the magazine with appeals to patriotism, mockery of the enemy were transferred to the occupied territory, distributed among frontiersmen. And since 1945, the magazine Perets paper was published in two versions. For the eastern regions of Ukraine, in fact, for all regions, except for a few maybe western ones, and for western Ukraine, reunified during World War II. The publications of two versions of paper can be interpreted as an attempt to form and develop a virtual Soviet space. This gradually included the western regions of Ukraine. It was a tool of soft indoctrination of the new Soviet territories, because Perets had its own specific for Western Ukraine. Its content was based on clear contrast between the positive Soviet and negative Polish, pre-war nationalists, and so on. And obviously the issues of paper typical for Eastern Ukraine, with their criticism of minor shortcomings, which at will could be interpreted as a criticism of whole system, were not yet suitable for other Western regions. And you can see on this slide the transformation of the paper symbol during the Soviet period. And these images clearly show how a certain symbolic canon was formed from Cossack perchilo to schematic image of paper. All of the symbols of the Soviet satirical magazines were transformed in the maybe same way. And you can see on this slide transformation paper and crocodile. So let's have a quick look at how vision of paper purposes transformed due to subjects of the Soviet media landscape. Firstly, it is needing to identify tactics and strategy of the magazine by persons responsible for the work of the media. For example, the Department of Agitation and Propaganda at the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Ukraine. At this level, there is a process of expressing power directives regarding Soviet humor. This level can also be considered as a manifestation of general Soviet mythology, which consists of basic ideological messages. Thus, according to the meeting of editors of newspapers of Soviet Ukraine in 1948, the purpose of the press was defined by the categories of weapon and tool, namely the strongest weapon of the party. The leaders of the meeting emphasized that caricature songs, chistushki, little funny songs, and feuilletons should have been used more often in the press. Therefore, paper could be used as a double weapon, as the press and the translator of humor. But despite the secondary humorous component, the official Soviet discourse was not monopoly serious. Authority encouraged to implement funny text, cartoons, to struggle with the external enemy and everyday shortcomings. Despite the protection of the old Soviet and Republican authorities, political satire did not easily take its place in the media system. There is evidence that other print media, even if they contained humorous text or cartoons, still treated them either with caution or as secondary, giving preference to serious texts. And And now you can see a quote of these two satirists, Kavinka and Makivchuk. And Makivchuk, the editor-in-chief of paper, was addressed by Kavinka, the permanent author of the magazine, which with a request to publish his humoresques in cases when they were rejected by publication of non-humorous content. When his humoresque was not published in the newspaper Sylsky Visti, Rural News, Kavinka wrote that for some reason our central newspapers push away laughter. Suspicious attitude to humor probably occurred due to its characteristic features, ambiguity, metaphors that can be interpreted differently, a wide layer of subtext, and this was common for a humor magazine. Therefore, there was a paradox. The ambiguity of humor sometimes helped to weaken the ideological control over the content of the satirical humorous publication, because there was a mechanism to remove responsibility for a joke. In a non-humorous magazine or newspaper against the background of general seriousness, the ambiguous content of the feuilleton or humoresque was immediately noticeable, which caused excessive attention to it from both the censor and the readers. This in turn increased the editor's responsibility for the magazine and its content. Secondly, it is the definition of the purpose of existence and activity of the magazine by the persons responsible for the publication of periods or paper. For example, editor-in-chief, executive secretary, heads of department of feuilletons and caricatures, etc. At this level, the editorial board of Perets assimilate government directives. The official formulation of the purpose of paper activity by the persons responsible for its publication can be traced by the thematic plans of the magazine, transcripts of speeches of the editor-in-chief, their latest to the party leadership, and so on. According to these documents, the activities of paper were also defined most often in the categories of struggle, protest against, and so on. The humorous content of the magazine was to provoke socially effective red laughter, to promote the struggle against the remnants of capitalism in the mind of people. And all the symbols of Soviet satirical magazines, as you can see on this slide, were associated with beating, burning, sweeping, pricks, blows, and it seems that they represented the variants that were sorted out for the title of the first Soviet satirical magazine, Crocodile, according to the memories of cartoonist Boris Efimov. And the opinion of the magazine's executives about entertainment humor, rather than as a political weapon or tool, was relatively negative. Among the main shortcomings of the previous management, Makivchuk also noted the terribly low ideological and artistic level of the magazine, tension, vulgarity, two small targets on which the magazine shoots. On the other hand, in the letter to Markevich, the deputy head of the propaganda and agitation department, regarding the members of the editorial board, we see that the humorous form of the materials in paper was still important for the editor-in-chief, Makivchuk. Makivchuk tried to dismiss Dolgolenko from the post of executive secretary, because he had an average cultural level and he lacked the sense of humor, which is why he could not write and edit material. Their editor-in-chief notes that a humorist must be in this position, after all. And Mikhail tried to maintain the status of paper as a publication with socially effective content for as long as possible. That is why many of the editor-in-chief's reports emphasize the effectiveness of the magazine's critical speeches. Employees of the magazine even collected statistics on the punishment of objects of ridicule of paper. With the help of such statistics, paper almost materialized its humor as a weapon and confirmed the status of the creator of effective red laugher. In the period from 1945 to 1955, paper was even exhibited as a terrible weapon because the employees of the magazine collected statistics on how many years of imprisonment the object of criticism of paper was sentenced and even to 20 years, as maybe you can see in this slide. Yes, it's maybe quite terrible, and it was an evidence of seriousness of this satirical magazine and its humor. But when we, sorry, and maybe I want to reconnect my demonstration of screen. And when we shoot to see of readers and their perception of this magazine, we should to see at the first article to my readers, laughing lovers, on behalf of paper, Perets Perchila, when readers are introduced to this publication. And on the other hand, the new red laugher had to look for roots for its legitimacy. The introductory article emphasized the imitation of Ukrainian laugher culture, and therefore Ukrainian laugher could unite both the Zaporizhian Kazakhs against the Turkish Sultan and Crown Hetman Pototsky, and almost contemporaries of the readers' shores against the UNR Sultan Senka Petlura. But the emphasis was on the national component of this humor. As my grandfather, Kindrat Pereperchila, said, how long our people have lived and how long they will live, we will never grieve. This is our Ukrainian nature to work, sing songs, dance, and laugh. As we can see in this case, the formula according to which Soviet humor was to act as a communicative practice has harmoniously embodied. Congratulationally, laugh is stimulated to work and became a part of everyday life and production. So paper readers were allowed to laugh for entertainment. And why do we see a difference between the formulation of the purpose of paper by party bodies, reasonable employees of the magazine, and how these goals is presented to readers? I think in this case, paper played the role of mediator between authority and recipients, some kind of the soft power. And on the other hand, paper had to compete for their readers' audience and government preferences, not only with crocodile in Ukraine and serious press, but also with humor folklore. And an analysis of sources, such as readers' letters to the magazine, oral history, and questionnaires showed that the magazine's readers had more opinions about the purposes of the paper issue than the magazine's employer and party bodies declared. First of all, readers more often perceived paper as just an entertainment publication. In his letter to the editorial in chief in 1971, a reader from Poltava, Bravar, wrote that when life is not easy for me, I take paper and read humoresques and feuilletons, rereading everything I've read the second or third time. I do not grab my stomach as it was the first time, but I love forget about disagreements, live with all the cells of the soul and body. In this case, the humor of paper played the function of relieving tension and relaxation. And the other letter from the builder Sichuvik, for example, offered his socially significant plots for paper, sent photos for the magazine's artists, and even asked for the certificate of the employer of paper. And then it will be inconvenient to recommend that I collect material for paper, he said in his letter in 1977. Therefore, by the 1980s, the authors of paper began to respond more to readers' needs. This can be seen from the fact that the number of small funny texts, similar to anecdotes that readers preferred, has increased. So their closest statements about role of paper were to authority discourse. The more frequent were statements about humor as a weapon or maybe a tool. And the contrary, we can see more laughter and entertainment in the low levels of the Soviet discourse. So Bakhtin calls the official culture monolithically serious, and this official seriousness is opposite by folk laughter culture. But in the Soviet society, the authorities tried to instill a legitimate official laughter, carnival culture in the official discourse. It was to erase the line between formal and informal discourse as much as possible and to allow control over the latter. According to the theory by Gramsci, as was mentioned earlier, totalitarian and authoritarian societies have practically no social units completely autonomous from state control. Therefore, the establishment of hegemony, which consists in the creation of those that have at least a semblance of relatives' autonomy and therefore make the process of indoctrination invisible. Maybe, in my opinion, satirical publications were important in this regard because their humor served as a distraction mechanism. This was a dissonance between the seriousness of ideological content and the comic form. Thus, in the struggle for hegemony, official discourse faced two problems. On the other hand, its recipients can distinguish between official and non-official discourses. They will, in desire to be able to construct their identity on the basis of official ideology, but in order to create an attractive official discourse, it must be brought closer to the life and understanding of ordinary people. Thus, Ostap Vishnya, satirists, wrote that satirists and humorous language should be close to the people, to the folk. That is why one has to listen, record with folklore materials. However, then the official discourse itself approaches the unofficial pole of public life, legalizing the latter. On the other hand, the more the official discourse differs from the informal one, the easier it is for the recipient to resist it. Another ambiguous role of political humor outlined by Perets is also related to this problem. It can be both a subversive mechanism for the existing regime and the authorities, and support it at the same time. The fact is, on the one hand, political humor, according to Freud's theory, expressed aggression towards the powerful, shows that they are mere mortals who do not need special respect. On the other hand, humor eliminates conflict situations between the government and citizens, sublimating aggressions. By ridiculing the authorities, the subjects of humor took the first step toward reconciliation with the authorities. Therefore, despite the fact that political humor was aimed at the rulers, it helped them retain power by dispelling resistance. It can be concluded that official political humor could stimulate daily resistance as an alternative to real resistance. And maybe we can assume that the authorities authorized the creation of a legitimate carnival culture that would help to assimilate the necessary science systems, basic ideological principles, and make Soviet culture as monolithic as possible. And maybe at the end of the perestroika period, the official discourse made its closest approach to the non-official one and began to sharply criticize the Soviet system. However, the official carnival culture could not lose its discursive role and therefore did not find its place in the new socio-cultural conditions. And thanks for your attention, and maybe that's all for me. Thank you.